So, good morning to all the participants. We have a very distinguished list of panelists today. Let me first welcome our honorable chief guest, Mr. Salman F. Rahman, who is the advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister on private industry and investment. And he's a very well-known industrialist himself. And we all know that he doesn't require any introduction in Bangladesh, for sure. And he is the most appropriate person to understand where the shoe is pinching from private sector perspective. So welcome to this event, Salman Bhai. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a keynote presentation will be made by Mr. Simon Christopher Wally. He's the lead financial sector specialist from the World Bank. And Nuzhat Anwar, she will be giving the welcome speech, and she's the acting country manager for Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal from IFC. Our panelists are from very diverse field. We have here with Mr. Chakravarti from the National Housing Bank of India, so that he can share with us the Indian experience with housing finance. Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti, for accepting our invitation. We have Nasir Ejaz Bijoy, CEO of Standard Chartered, and Nasir is a constant contributor to promote Bangladesh and also identify where the problems lies and so on. So he's always a very productive and very thoughtful person in the finance field. We have Mr. Salimuddin, Chairman, Bangladesh House Building Finance Corporation. We all know Bangladesh House Building Finance Corporation has been with us for a very long time and will continue to serve the purpose of housing construction in Bangladesh for years to come. What is missing? What more could be done? Where we can bring more the dynamism in the organization? Those will be some of the issues that we can discuss and also hear from Mr. Salimuddin himself, so that his own thoughts on that. We have Mr. Dr. Sheikh Samsuddin Ahmed. He's the commissioner, Bangladesh Security Exchange Commission, and we know that housing finance and long-term bond issue and the role of Security Exchange Commission in promoting that will be very important in Bangladesh perspective. So and finally we have Mr. Thierno Habib Han, who is the Global Housing Finance and Capital Market Specialist, a lead person from IFC. At the end, we will have some concluding observations from Mr. Alan Formu, Regional Industry Director, Financial Institutions Group Asia Pacific from IFC. Thank you all, and let me request Simon Wally to make his, first let me request Nuzhat Anwar to give her welcome speech.
Sorry.
Nuzhat, please.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for the good introduction. Good morning and welcome to the IFC's fourth Housing Roundtable series. And this is part 2, and which is organized by PRI. First of all, I would like to welcome our chief guest, Mr. Salman Fazlur Rahman, MB, Honorable Advisor to the Prime Minister on Private Industry and Investment, for his participation today. I'm also delighted to welcome the participation of our distinguished panelists and presenters and valued guests from the government of Bangladesh, Bangladesh Bank, Bangladesh Security Exchange Commissions, Raju, House Building Finance, and National Housing Bank, India, and financial institutions and other housing developers present today on the workshop. First of all, I would like to begin by highlighting the opportunity of affordable housing finance in Bangladesh and the key challenges and takeaways that we deliberated in part 1 of Housing Finance Roundtable, so that we can collectively come up with some next steps to develop, this very important sector. This is a very important sector for World Bank Group, housing is one of the center of the IFC country strategy for the next 5 years. And we definitely want to do more in Bangladesh on this sector. Thus, this kind of workshop of series we have started doing a couple of months back. So let's start with the opportunities. With this rapid economic growth and increasing climate vulnerabilities, in the last 2 decades, we have seen that urban population in Bangladesh reached about 67 million. It's about into 2020. And it's expected to, half of the population of the country would be living in urban areas by 2030. Definitely that requires, our attention to it. And according to a recent study, existing demand of urban affordable housing is 6 million units, which is estimated to increase to 10.5 million units by 2030. IFC estimates the current financing gap is about USD 59 billion for just 3.5 million units of housing. To meet this growing demand, home loans worth of 2.52 billion have to be disbursed annually. In contrast, the mortgage penetration in Bangladesh housing market is very low. It's about 3% only. Versus probably India's 10%, and for the developed markets, it's about 50 to 70%. Housing finance companies, only 7% of the total loans of the financial institutes. Data is as of March 21, is only 7%. And green housing is also yet to be on the discussion, being its lack of awareness and also, the misconception of high cost related to green housing. So clearly there is a lot of work to do, and also with the investment opportunities and more to do on this sector. Challenges as of now on the discussions we had in last couple of roundtables with stakeholders and different forums. The challenges that we see is definitely comes at first is the regulatory environment for banks and NBFIs. It's not a priority sector. Housing is not a priority sector. There is no, kind of separate regulatory framework, and there is no technically an affordable, housing definition as well, which is maybe the first start should be. Hence, there is a lack of focus on this segment for to bring it to priority. Lack of funds being we all know that long-term financing is an issue in the financial sector. Informal demand segment is also an issue, and forced closure. The legal framework for enforcing forced closure in case of defaults does not support the financial sector. So we have had these challenges through our last couple of discussions. And what we want to do about it is going forward, we want to work together with all the stakeholders. Even last in the housing roundtable, Deputy Governor came and the financial and the Ministry of Finance participated. So we had we had concluded that we need more effective coordination among Ministry of Housing, Public Works, Finance Division, and private sector together to build this sector in the priority. And we also had a couple of suggestions which we probably will hear out more from our discussion today. So I think with further, not delaying my, kind of deliberation, let's try to focus on the discussion today. I look forward, honestly, for a very candid and, open discussion that really helps us to bring the issues. I think we should not shy away here to talk about what exactly is the issue here. That would immensely help us to take the agenda forward in Bangladesh. Once again, thank you so much for all joining today. Thank you. Over to you, Hasan Bhai.
Thank you, Nuzhat. You provide a very nice overview and background and progress so far, which I skipped deliberately, knowing that you will cover it. So let me now request our keynote presentation speaker, Mr. Simon Christopher Wally. Mr. Wally, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to PRI and IFC for organizing the event. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to say, I think I was in Bangladesh right before the pandemic, almost 2 years ago. It was my last trip. So it's great to kind of return, albeit virtually. So I hopefully you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Good. So I've got about 10-15 minutes. I wanted to give a bit of context, throw out a few ideas, explain a bit what the World Bank does and how we connect into various countries in terms of developing housing finance and affordable housing markets. And then I'll try and bring it back a bit to the Bangladesh context with some ideas of what might be possible to move things forward. So let me see if I can get the slides to move forward. So I'll start off with a few introduction slides. I've got 3 country case studies, India, Kenya, and Egypt. And then, as I said, we'll go through a couple of recommendations and some conclusions. So just starting with the World Bank, and this is kind of our footprint at the moment in terms of the countries where we're active in terms of technical assistance or lending operations. And really, I think housing has risen up the agenda over the past few years. I think it's becoming increasingly important. I think the COVID pandemic has just increased the importance of having a safe, sanitary environment to live in. And I think we're seeing it rise up as kind of a top priority for many governments. We've seen this in Kenya, we've seen this in India, we're seeing it in Pakistan at the moment. All across West Africa, we've got about 6 different projects that are just starting up. I think the 2 parts of the world where we're busiest at the moment are probably Africa and South Asia. And I think that reflects that these are the 2 regions of the world that have got the fastest growing populations, but also are still urbanizing at a rapid pace. And that's kind of where the most housing is going to be needed over the next few decades. So I think that's kind of the focus, certainly for us at the moment in terms of our housing finance agenda. I think one of the positive things of why housing has moved up the agenda is potentially the Sustainable Development Goals. I think prior to this, the Millennium Development Goals that preceded the SDGs, housing didn't feature at all. Under SDG 11, we now have an explicit target referring to housing to have adequate, safe, affordable housing and basic services for all by 2030. I think many countries have adopted this and have taken really positive action, formulated plans, and tried to tackle some of the inherent structural problems that have limited access to affordable housing for many. One of the problems is the cost. I think that the minute you start adding up the price of units and then multiplying it by your housing needs, you get into numbers of billions, if not trillions. In 2014, McKinsey launched this great study, which I think is still very relevant. There's a great website with this study on it and lots of other material, which I'd encourage people to look at. But one of the conclusions of the report was that the total cost of providing the needed affordable housing over the 10-year period going up to 2025 would be as much as $16 trillion. They estimated that the public sector would be able to cover at most 3 trillion of that. So one of the key messages here is government can't foot the bill for all the housing that's needed. And then that leads you to think, how can the public sector enable the private sector to take a greater role? How can you crowd in investors? How can you connect capital markets so that the long-term investors can have access to returns from investing into long-term assets in housing? And this is one of the fundamental challenges that we're facing across many of the countries where we're operating. So just to set out again from the Bangladesh perspective, and honestly, I think this slide I could use for many of the countries where we operate, be it kind of many of the countries in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, or East Asia, where Indonesia, Philippines. So on the demand side, I think that the big constraint is how expensive mortgages are and how unaffordable it is for many people. And there's many reasons for this, from informality. I think already some of the obstacles have been mentioned of foreclosure, a difficult, unreliable property titling system. You have the regulatory obstacles, particularly in Bangladesh. You have caps on lending, kind of the maximum portfolio amount for your banks. None of this provides a conducive environment. None of it is encouraging for the commercial banks to see this as an investment opportunity at the moment. I think more needs to be done to create that opportunity and get the banks to really kind of grasp it and develop the products offerings to grow their markets. So that's kind of the context, the background. I'll jump in to the examples, some of the things that we're doing at the moment. My first example is India. And I actually might not spend too long on this. My good friend, Mr. Chakravarti, is here, who knows this far better than I do. But I do want to kind of say, from our perspective, this is kind of one of our almost landmark projects. It closed a couple of years ago, and it really did something that we've never been able to achieve before, but I think is incredibly relevant for many countries, and we're kind of using it as a model and trying to replicate what we did elsewhere. And what's it tried to count? We did a $100 million line of credit to National Housing Bank with the aim of refinancing informality. And there's two dimensions to informality. You see the quadrants here. Informality of income, so those are not non-salaried workers, and informality of property, which doesn't always mean no title at all. There may be some tenure rights, but it's not enough always to get kind of a full mortgage that security rights can be perfected upon. And so you have the four quadrants, but sometimes you have formal income, informal property. And what we were really trying to get to the bottom right quadrant, informal income, informal property. And with the great support of the National Housing Bank, and it took us some time to get there. It took some convincing of the lenders to start going there. And when we started this, we were kind of on the heels of the whole subprime crisis. We were told what we were doing was kind of dangerous. And I think what we found actually is that the low income in India, at least, are very creditworthy. They repay their loans. For them, they grasp the opportunity of being able to own their own properties. And for the lenders, they realize this is a huge market. It's hundreds of millions of households. Okay, it's small loans, it's tight margins, but if we do enough of them, there's a very good return to be made here. And so some of the effects of this, we saw a huge influx of funds into this affordable housing sector. It really created a market that wasn't there before. It's helped in terms of the urban planning, in terms of investing into more formal city building, less slums. And of course, there's a big impact on employment and economic growth, which particularly in a post-COVID recovery period, I think it's something that all governments are looking for. The other example I have, which I'm working on at the moment, is on Kenya. This is a very, very small, specific example, and it's actually not something that the World Bank would typically work on this kind of level of project. It's a small PPP project in an area called Naivasha in Nakuru County. It's about 3 hours outside Nairobi. And what we've been trying to do there is just do a PPP pilot. So we've worked with local government. We've helped them every step of the way with training, the legal setup for a PPP structure, how you do all the feasibility work, how you do the procurement process, the tendering, and accompanied them every step of the way. And what we've been trying to do is really build the institutional capacity to manage PPPs and kind of have a demonstration effect. And the next phase that we're about to embark on is then to really institutionalize a lot of the learnings from this and replicate it across many of the counties across Kenya. And again, this comes to that earlier message I had about the need of crowding in private funds. Particularly at the county level, government doesn't have an awful lot of resources. They do have land, however, and this is a way for them to make best use of their land and meet their commitments in terms of provision of affordable housing. I think there's examples I could have used. I think we've, IFC have done some PPPs in India. We're working in the state of Tamil Nadu at the moment. We're working in Punjab province in Pakistan on PPP frameworks. I think it's definitely something that has a lot of potential, and that I think Bangladesh should kind of look at ways of doing more of this. My last example is Egypt, and I've been working at the World Bank for just over 16 years now, and I think I've been working on Egypt the whole time. And this has been a succession. I think we're on our 5th project now, and we've almost taken a programmatic approach and just trying to resolve one thing at a time and building each time and developing it. So starting off with some of the basic things, we started working on titling, foreclosure. We then took a stab. We set up the mortgage refinance company to help the maturity mismatch that a lot of the lenders were facing. And more recently, we focused more on the supply side and the subsidy mechanisms, helping the government. In total, we put in over $1 billion of lending. The government itself has put in far more than that, and there's been very strong leadership from the Egyptian government. They've seen it as a priority. And in terms of results, I think it's probably up one of our most successful programs in terms of actual delivery. These numbers are actually slightly out of date, but you're looking at over 250,000 houses being delivered, most of them to middle or very low income people. We've had a focus on having gender equality, so 1/5 of them are to female beneficiaries. Over the lifetime of the project, you're looking at creating 1.5 million jobs. And the project is still going, and they're delivering 100,000 plus units per year. But one of the messages in Egypt is it's taken us a long time to get there. I think all of this is the fruit of a lot of work upstream on tackling some of the structural reforms. So those are the examples. So I've just got 3 more slides, I think. I think one is just a context setting. I think I was asked by the organizer to think a bit about the institutional framework and some of the common things that we do in terms of looking at where housing and housing finance markets are looking at kind of what building blocks are there, which building blocks are missing, which building blocks need strengthening. And on the demand side, you're particularly looking at the financial institutions, what's their capacity to do more mortgage originations, their capacity to manage risk, their appetite to take risk. I think you need a capital market. I think housing, unlike other financial products, needs the long-term investment, long-term funding. And at some point, it's almost inevitable that you have to have recourse to capital markets. And that then leads to the question of how do you have the right institutions to do this, whether it's a securitization conduit, an institution like the National Housing Bank in India, or the instruments like mortgage-backed securities, for instance. And then other kind of some of the basic structures on things like the financing for rental markets, for instance. I think on the supply side, again, some of these things have been mentioned. It's about having a developer sector, the financing for developers, both in terms of equity, the working capital, and this kind of the longer term debt financing. And then just an efficient land administration system, financing for infrastructure, and the whole urban codes, planning, and just an easy environment for developers to operate in. Then all of this is underpinned by the enabling environment, which is things like the stable macro environment, which is particularly important for anything relating to long-term finance, but data and the government support.
2 minutes, Mr. Wali.
Sure. Okay, so this slide, this is actually a slide I presented when I was here 2 years ago. I did a report. These were like the key conclusions. I'll present it again because I think a lot of them are still valid. I think on the operational side, I think it's important to have coordination. I think having some sort of cross-ministerial stakeholder body, which also includes representation from the private sector, is important. I think on the regulatory side, I think there's a lot that Bangladesh Bank could do to make things easier. I think there has to be some sort of funding solution that has the potential to link in and create synergies with some of the pension reform going on. On the institutional side, I think you need to leverage the institutions you do have. I think we had a great meeting with BHBFC. They're ambitious, they want to do lots of things, but they need reform. I think they can't carry on doing the things they've been doing for the last few years. I think that there's got to be some change in their role, their mandate, and more of a private sector enabling role to be taken on. And then my last points, again, as I said with Egypt, you can't do everything at once, so you have to be realistic. I think I understand that housing is now part of the National Development Plan, which I think that's a development since I was last there. I think that's a great first step. You need to follow through with that. One of the things to make that happen is the need for a champion. I think in all the countries where we've had success, whether it's kind of India, Pakistan, Kenya, Nigeria, Indonesia, we've always had a very strong political support, right from the president, vice president, to strong minister, but you need that leadership there and that buy-in. And then one point that I feel strongly about is the need for data. You need to be able to measure things. You can't make policy without knowing if policy is working. You can't set policy without having the right parameters to set it. So measuring and collecting data. And then lastly, I think learn from experience elsewhere, but ultimately you've got local problems. There's particular challenges in Bangladesh, and you need to come up with Bangladesh solutions to your problems, potentially inspired by lessons elsewhere, but it ends up being local solutions for local problems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Simon Wali, for your very comprehensive. We understand that the time didn't allow you to elaborate many of the issues, but that's the way we have to live with. But we have your whole presentation. We can share it with all participants, and hopefully we'll have other opportunities to go into deeper in all these areas. And your final lesson is very important. This is a long haul process. It's not going to be done in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It will require time, and every step we have to solve problems and barriers and overcome them and get to there. Thank you. May I now request Mr. Chakraborty, General Manager, National Housing Bank, because we thought that it will be relevant that we hear the two presentations together, and then our panelists will be able to draw from both and make their observations on both presentations. So, Mr. Chakraborty, please. I will specifically request Mr. Chakraborty to highlight two aspects. This You know that India has initiated a 10-year trajectory to make housing affordable to everyone by 2022. And they have also given a clear definition of affordable housing. And we also know that institutions have been established to provide financial support to the industry in India. And you are in charge of one of those institutions which are playing very vital role. So maybe you can share your experience of how successful have been these HFCs in improving access to affordable housing finance for the lower and lower middle income segments of the population. And secondly, how do you handle the informal segment in India? Because that is very pertinent for Bangladesh also. We face the same similar challenges. And the informal income underwriting challenges and methodology adopted by National Housing Bank, your institution, in that regard. Thank you, Mr. Chakraborty. Please proceed. Mr. Chakraborty, I can't hear you. Maybe you're muted. Yes. Please go ahead. Now you are unmuted. Yeah. We still can't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah, now we can hear. Please.
Yes. So I will share the Indian experience, sir. So that first thing is geographically and culturally, both Bangladesh and India are very similar, sir. So it would not be possible. It would not be difficult for Bangladesh to adopt what has been adopted in India, sir. So with this premise, NHB has started its operations 1988, sir. And right now we do three main activities. One is supervision of housing finance institutions, financing, and promotion and development. So these are the three roles. In the next slide, sir, I will be able to explain exactly what we do. In financing, we raise long-term resources and then we deploy it to what is called a refinancing mode, sir. We extend refinance to both housing finance companies and banks, and also other set of institutions called cooperative banks and rural regional banks. All those banks we give, sir. As a supervisory function, earlier regulation also was with National Housing Bank. We used to give certificate of registration to housing finance companies. As Mr. Simon mentioned, yes, we used to register them with National Housing Bank, but right now that power to register has been transferred to Reserve Bank of India. But nevertheless, we supervise these housing finance companies, which are around 100 right now, sir. So we just see the guidelines laid down by Reserve Bank. Are they complied or not? We do an off-site and on-site inspection of these housing finance companies. And the last role what we play is a promotion and developmental role. Like we publish our trend and progress of housing in India, and it is laid in the Parliament of India, sir. We conduct training programs, developing a skill in the sector, housing finance sector, and we also publish what is called a residential price index, sir. These are some of the activities just to illustrate, sir. The next slide, I will just, this is probably, I think, our, if you can see, when NHB was formed in 1988, outstanding housing loans contributed about 0.7% of the GDP, sir. Right now, if you see, they are around 11%. Sir. And especially in the last few years, 6 years, Housing for All was adopted in 2015, sir. In the last 6 years, it has grown up from 8.6%, 8.5% to 11%. Sir. So significant growth has been there in the last few years. The reason why I wanted to share this with you is that, the next, this is the share of housing finance companies and banks, sir. Earlier, when we started off here in 86, 89, it was housing finance companies used to be 23% and banks used to be 77% of the housing loan portfolios. But somewhere around 97, 98, when banks shied away for some reason, housing finance companies took over that particular role and they started dominating the market. But eventually, in the last few years, again, banks have come back because capital is a constraint. So banks have started dominating the market. Nevertheless, even now 66% is with banks, but 33% is with housing finance companies, sir. In terms of volume, because rupee and taka are more or less the same, so please permit me to quote in Indian rupees, sir. It's about 22.75 lakh crores, sir, actually, the volume, sir. So which has grown from about 11. In the next slide, I can share that, sir. Yes, sir. If you see, it was about 11.82 lakh crores in FY16, sir, and which moved up to 21.77 lakh crores, almost doubled in the last 6 years. And if you see, the blue part is share of banks, and the orange part is share of housing finance companies. It has been more or less consistent. Give and take, it is 1/3, 2/3. So 1/3 is by HFCs and 2/3 is by banks. The ability of banks is that they are able to give at lower rates of interest. On the other hand, the ability of housing finance companies are they are able to penetrate into far-flung areas and informal income groups. Sir. This is the distinction, and this is the segment they serve, sir. If you just see it, as I shared with you, just go to the earlier slide, ma'am. Yeah. If you see, it increased from 8.6% to about 11%, sir. So last year, let me also share with you, there was a small drop in GDP. So therefore, probably the ratio has gone. The reason is, in case housing finance can grow faster than your GDP, sir, it will accelerate your GDP, sir. We have found out in India that there's a about 0.4% contribution to the GDP growth rate, sir. If India is growing at 8.5% and housing finance is growing about 10 to 11%, sir, certainly this will contribute about 0.4% for the growth of the overall GDP, sir. So this is what we have achieved in the last few years in Indian context. Of course, India is a very big country and we have to achieve a lot. We can't compare with a smaller country like Bangladesh, but yes, just to share our own experience. Now, going back to the next slide, let me share briefly what are the things that contributed for the growth of housing in India, sir. As you know, India is a federal country with states. So there are one union list. There are two types of laws. One is in union list, one is in state list, and some are in concurrent list. Land is in state list. So any land reforms has to be brought by the state governments, not the union governments. Union government can only intervene in the financial sector. So therefore, Government of India enacted a real estate regulatory authority model guidelines in each of the states in India, about 29 states and union territories, laid down rules under these guidelines, and they framed a real estate regulatory authority. Typically, the builders were not regulated in our country earlier, sir. To regulate them so that they become answerable, we thought they should be regulated through a real estate regulatory authority. So this helped.
Your sound is lost. Mr. Chakraborty, your sound is lost.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
So, on the real estate regulatory authority, I've explained, sir. On the income tax exemption, in case any builder constructs affordable residential housing projects, the profit on that is exempt from tax.
All the profit? Or?
Yes, sir. All the profit. So that is one exemption we have brought in, and I will, going by your questions, I'll also answer what is affordable housing. But yes, profit on building of affordable housing is exempt from tax. Similarly, as you told, housing for all, we call it Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana in India, and through that we have almost grounded about 60 to 70 lakh units in the last 5-6 years. Some of them to be completed, but some of them still under completion. They are through 4 verticals, what we call affordable housing in partnership, beneficiary-led construction, in-situ development of slums, and last is credit-linked subsidy scheme. Interest is subsidized. Sir. These are the 4 verticals through which Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana has intervened in India. Sir. And similarly, there is one fund called Affordable Housing Fund, which is administered by National Housing Bank, where banks who fall shortfall in their priority sector lending have to contribute to this particular fund, and we get the funds at around say 2.2%, and we on lend at 3% to housing finance companies. They are, and this is for a period of 7 years, sir. This will help in reducing the cost of borrowing for especially lower income groups, that is borrowers whose income is up to 3 lakhs in rural areas and 6 lakhs in urban areas. Of course, we have women beneficiaries, then we have some other socially vulnerable groups in this, sir. The next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So, sir, having shared my experience in India, I thought there are a few ideas which I want to share, which can be useful country like Bangladesh, sir. I think at least set up 3 or 4 financial institutions exclusively catering to housing finance. The reason why I suggest is that underwriting in a bank, I have also worked in a bank earlier, sir. There are a bouquet of things which a bank does, right from accepting deposit to MSME, large loans, personal loans, many other loans. So focus would not be on underwriting housing loans. So therefore, if 3 or 4 institutions can be set up exclusively catering to the housing loan, that would be the skill set required to underwrite a loan is slightly different from the other loans. That could be useful, sir. Plus, recovery is also typically in a production credit, the recovery is 1 year, 2 years. Here, normally it is 5 to 10 years, sir. So therefore, the recovery mechanism in a housing loan is slightly different. So I think exclusive institutions for this would be useful, sir. Now, these institutions can be regulated by Bangladesh Bank, and in India, they are a part of housing NBFCs, we call them, and in your country, they call NBFIs. They can be part of NBFIs, but only thing is that prescription should be laid down on minimum CRAR. They should be slightly rigid because the long-term credit is being given. So in India, they are about now 15% is a capital adequacy ratio that is required for housing finance companies. Similarly, loan to value ratio, each loan should not exceed 80% of the value of the house, sir. There's a cap on loan to value ratio. In some cases, lower ticket loans up to say 25 lakhs or 35 lakhs, they can go to 90%. By and large, the loan to value ratio is prescribed. These things will help bring some discipline to the sector and also help us bringing more foreign flow into the country, sir. And these institutions can be set up in PPP mode, predominantly by private sector, improving efficiency, but to create the public confidence, they can be developed by, say, some government bodies also, sir. In India, there are 2 types of institutions, both public sector as well as HFCs, both private sector also, sir. HDFC Limited, which is the largest lender in India, is purely private sector. On the other hand, the next largest lender is LIC Housing Finance in India, which is a public sector institution. So both models can be successful, sir. The next one, just last point on the earlier slide, ma'am. Yes. This can be, focus can be on special segment like women borrowers, informal income borrowers, low income groups. You can set up one institution exclusively catering to them, or 1 or 2 institutions as you please, catering to them, sir, based on the ticket size they serve and all these things, sir. With this can help us accelerate the penetration of housing in Bangladesh, sir. The next one is that, the next slide, please. Yeah. So, and another suggestion I have is that there could be one apex housing finance institution equivalent to a national housing bank, something like Bangladesh Housing Bank. You can say Badi in Bangladesh, I think. Bangladesh Badi Bank, sir, if I'm not mistaken. So you can call it Bangladesh Badi Bank or whatever it is. So this can channelize long-term funding. Typically in housing finance, the requirements on the liability for a housing finance institution could be 5 to 10 years. So this institution can help channelize the long-term funding, and it can be both for banks and housing finance companies. Even banks, when they lend, I don't think they are able to get a 10-year deposit in any banks, even in Bangladesh or in India, sir. It is a challenge. So this long-term funding will help us to eliminate the asset liability mismatch, because housing loan is a long-term asset. So in case we can elongate the long-term liability, probably that will be helpful, sir. And this can be set up by Bangladesh Bank or government of Bangladesh also, sir.
Thank you.
National Housing Bank was initially set up by Reserve Bank of India, but right now it is wholly owned by Government of India, sir. So this can be adopted with say 100 crores or whatever it is. And then the Apex Housing Finance can be permitted to raise funds both domestically and internationally. See what happens when this institution is set up by say Government of Bangladesh or by Bangladesh Bank, it has a better credibility than any other commercial institution, sir. So they can raise 10-year fund domestically, or they can raise it internationally, sir. They will have that credibility, sir. And any interest rate subsidies that have to be passed right now, for example, you have a cap on not lending beyond a particular rate of interest. We also have intervened what is called a credit linked subsidy scheme, sir, where about 6.5% subsidy is passed to the home loan buyer whose income is less than 6 lakhs per annum in urban centers. Those subsidies can be passed through this particular institution, this particular Apex Housing Finance institution. Right now, I think the regulation and supervision can be left with Bangladesh Bank, since it is only 3-4 institutions. When this set of institutions grow, probably this institution will start regulating.
Yes, Mr. Chakraborty, if you can conclude in 1 minute.
Yeah, I think I am at the last slide, sir. The next one.
Okay.
The next slide, please. Yeah, I think I'm through with it.
Okay. Just thank you very much.
Answering your
if you can just say something on underwriting challenge.
Yes. So yeah, answering your own question, sir. I think I would like to share that NHB does not see. We don't underwrite loans directly, sir. We are a refinancing institution. Earlier, we were a regulator. We don't prescribe any underwriting standard. It is left to the originating institutions. They set their own. They take the risk and they set their own underwriting standards. Two things we lay is credit CRAR, what is the capital adequacy ratio, and loan to value ratio. These two are the only things. Whatever risk or underwriting standards, they only do it, sir. But let me also tell you, we have done a program with World Bank, which Mr. Simon Valley was discussing, where assessing informal income like taxi drivers, vegetable vendors. I think most of banks in India and other lending institutions have been doing it. I think lending to informal borrowers, you have a very big example in Grameen Bank, sir. The world will definitely see Bangladesh as a leader in lending to informal segments. So assessing the income, only difference here is this is not a production credit. This is a sort of long-term credit for 5 or 10 years. So one has to be cautious whether that income can be sustainable over 5 years or not. Alternately, you can take a group guarantee of the group, 3 or 4 women or 10 women or men who can guarantee themselves, sir. And the underlying house itself is a collateral, sir.
Yes.
And it is a challenge, but definitely that is a big collateral, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chakraborty, for your very insightful
Thank you so much.
presentation. We learned a lot, and please stay with us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. May I now request Dr. Sheikh Samsuddin Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed, are you here?
I'm here.
Yes, I can see you. I can see you. You are here. We know that BSAC has been doing a fantastic job in terms of developing the bond market. I would like to hear from you how you are coordinating with Bangladesh Bank and Ministry of Finance in bringing about the necessary changes. That's one area. The other thing that I would like to hear your views is there have you discussed the possibility of transforming the national savings schemes assets, converting them into bond of their respective maturities, which would give enormous depth of 3 to 4 lakh crore taka in liquidity to the bond market. This is one idea that we'd like to hear your opinion and your institution's opinion in that regard. And also, housing and infrastructure are correlated. You know that if you have a satellite city, not everybody can live in Dhaka and work in Dhaka. So some has to be in the periphery of Dhaka. We need infrastructure. We need infrastructure like rapid communications in various modes, plus healthcare and education infrastructure, etc. Building those will require money also. So can asset-backed securities be an instrument in the development of urban planning in a structured way, which will allow people to be mobile and working at the same time, living a little bit further from the city center. Please, Mr.
Thank you very much,
Shamsuddin Ahmed.
Hassan Mansoor, Dr. Hassan Mansoor. Good morning to chief guest, keynote speaker, distinguished guests, and everybody. A few things to be mentioned, very critical questions by Mansoor Bhai, but a few prelude to that is that capital markets is always engaged in the real estate sector in Bangladesh. As a proof that we have 7 listed companies in cement sector, ceramic, we have about 5, and there are 42 engineering sector companies listed in the exchanges, and half of which, including steel and cable, are actually listed as well. All the large real estate related companies are listed. Beyond that, the capital market, as a regulator, we provide the permission for raising bond by the NGOs. They have collected a considerable amount of money by, for example, the Sajida Foundation, the BRAC, and so on. And the financial institutions are also facilitated by us in varieties of ways, and you may be knowing that 10% of all the credit provided to the private sector is more or less housing loan as a class. So the capital market is quite a bit engaged in the real estate sector of the country. Though there were only 5 construction real estate company in 1970s, now we have about 1,500 companies which are producing. So the volume has gone up because there is a great demand. This is an incredible demand, and it's increasing as we are economically advancing and marching with greater ability to save and earn. So we have a supply shortage compared to the demand for varieties of reasons. I'm not going to that economic analysis, but what I would like to say is that the most important challenge, even those 2 keynote speakers have mentioned in a way, that actually reaching the poor and enabling them to have housing. I mean, the housing for the poor and the near middle class is the primary challenge. Towards that, the government is doing a lot of work. We have about 500,000 houses donated by the current government, by the program called Ashrayan Prokolpo Dui. So this is one thing, and we have about 6 million households covered by the Amar Badi, Amar Khamar Prokolpo. So we have government interest, significant interest in facilitating the poor and the near middle class of people. But government is not enough. So there are other things coming up. For example, we have something called Bangladesh House Building Finance Corporation, which is the lone public sector dedicated financing company for housing sector in the country. And they provide credit for housing. This is 100% government owned, but they only have 110 crore taka as their paid-up capital. Authorized capital is 110 crore taka, and the paid-up capital is also 110 crore taka. So, which is very small with a population of 170 million people. So, still they are trying their best, even though they have done only about 2 lakh units of household since the last 50 years. So we can say House Building Finance Corporation can actually look forward to these capital market instruments, for example, bond. We are ready to facilitate them, or even we will seek that they will be coming forward for the listing requirement, so that the House Building Finance government is looking forward to have public sector enterprises listed in the exchanges. So this is a good place where, if this company comes to the market, they can actually be guaranteed by the real estate behind it. So it has a very win-win scenario for the company as well as the people. So only 110 crore taka is a peanut for the housing sector loan companies. So I really would like to see and looking forward to have any kind of conversation and consultation with them so that they can come and get listed in the market and raise a substantial amount of money.
Thank you.
In fact, they can go forward and look for bond, not only within Bangladesh, and can reach out abroad because it has 100% government ownership. So it's a kind of near government guarantee. And they can raise the fund from varieties of sources, including global financial institutions. So I look forward that HBFC actually can come up. And there are other private sector organizations which are working towards facilitating the housing sector. They can also come forward, and we are ready to be useful to them. Private
Thank you.
sector is primarily engaged in middle class. So we have to see how we can coordinate with other sectors like local government, the NBR, the Housing Authority, Land Administration, DAP, and all this. If we can collaborate them, then we can have a better policy which can take the housing from only to the richer class of people to the entire community of the country. Then again, the IFC and the World Bank Group can come forward, can facilitate with more idea in the housing sector, and can facilitate the NGOs and the microfinance institutions in subsidizing some of the high interest rates that are provided by the microfinance institutions for housing as well. So that can be a step forward. I would like to say my final word that the capital market is ready to be useful to the housing requirement of the people because it's a constitutional right, and our political leadership has every interest in ensuring sustainable and inclusive housing in the country. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Mr. Samsudin, for your very thoughtful and very welcoming.
I forgot to mention one thing, 1 second,
Please.
that we are looking forward to actually work with the REHAB, the Real Estate Housing Association of Bangladesh, and other through which we can do some tokenization of the real estate financing market. We want to tokenize it onto to the blockchain methodology in reducing the cost and encashing everybody's available sources so the housing sector can grow. Thank you.
Very, very nice to hear your encouraging words and supporting hand. You really welcome to see the changes, and we really appreciate your support. We have been a very good friend for the development of the bond market and the housing sector in particular. Thank you very much. May I now request Nasser Ezaz Bijoy, CEO of Standard Chartered Bank. Nasser, I would like to ask you two specific questions in addition to whatever you wish to say. One is, if I say that, what's in your view are the three main challenges or solutions that's required in terms of regulatory reforms and market development in the case of Bangladesh? And secondly, your thoughts on insurance market and pension fund, how these segments of the financial sector can contribute to the development of the housing market in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mansoor. I think very pertinent questions. So I'll just probably start with the context to understand what's the potential. So basically, as Nuzhat mentioned, that there's a strong correlation between the economic prosperity and the urbanization ratio. Global urbanization ratio is 56%. But if you look at North America, is 82%, Europe 75%, Asia is lagging at 52%, Bangladesh is 38%. So clearly, when Bangladesh, if it reaches its aspiration of 2041 to be a high-income country, the urbanization ratio is likely to reach around 65%. So let's say if it's 60%, and the population grows from 165 to 200 in the next 20 years, we're talking about 120 million urbanized people, which means currently it's 63, which means it is going to be almost double. That means it's like a 3 Dhaka city coming together, but it's not going to be Dhaka city only, right? It will be a mix of expansion in the current urban cities. At the same time, new township needs to be developed. So it's a combination of that. And this will not be inhibited by only the affluent, but also the affluent, medium, aspirant, medium, and low income. So it's all spectrum that will happen. Just to, before I go into finance side, I just want to highlight our experience of the repayment track record. We see the affluent, which has strong wealth, and the first-time homeowners are the best segment in terms of repayment, rather than those aspirant who are actually leveraging their properties, more speculative investment. So I think it's important to understand that why banking sector is comfortable with the risk appetite for those names. So the potential for even the medium income or low income is possible as long as the legal framework supports it, as long as the enforceability is easier, as long as the regulatory framework in terms of completing the process is easier. So clearly the reward is quite significant. Now, what do we need, and what is the benefit of developing the real estate sector? Apart from providing the basic need of housing, but it also it generates construction material related to all industries, service sector like banks, insurance, freight agents, everyone gets to benefit. So it's clearly no brainer that it's an important sector, although it already contributes 8% directly and 8.4% from the construction sector, but the potential is significantly higher. Now, what do we need to have this sector to flourish? Now, at this point of time, 10% of the financing is from the banking and NBI sector is going to housing, but it's traditionally the banks and housing only. Capital markets directly has not been tapped into for financing that. Why is it the case? Because one, I think obviously the investor base will have to be ready. So that's where a point of pension fund, life insurance fund needs to come in. Sovereign wealth fund that needs to come in. At the same time, the confidence on the reinforcement needs to come in. So therefore, the repossession needs to come in, right? So from that perspective, it requires an ecosystem to be developed. An ecosystem includes, starting from the occupant or the rent tenants. Second is the service provider, which includes the developer, a rating agency, and all those appraisers and everything. Then you also need a kind of a what do you call this? This is a management mezzanine, which is actually mezzanine, which actually are constituted of two major parties. One is actually the investment managers, because if you want to raise, let's say, REIT, if you want to do REIT, then you need obviously an investment manager who will decide on the investment portfolio, because REIT can be in three ways. REIT companies can have they can own property, they can have mortgage portfolio, and they can have a combination of both. So the investment manager like BlackRock and others similar to which can be developed in Bangladesh, they will have to decide on the mix of the portfolio. And then you need the professional real estate managers like CBRE, who will actually do a report on the market, the index, property index, which will help and manage the properties, which will provide kind of a confidence on the continuation or sustainability of the income flow that will be given to the REIT owners. What does REIT do? It provides an access to large pool of investors without owning a property to get the benefit of the income generated from those properties, right? So this can play a role of equity as well as debt. But this is generally preferred to be listed. Therefore, for listing it, all those regulatory requirements needs to be met. So on the capital market side, you can do REIT, you can have ABS, asset-backed securitization backed by mortgage, but these will have to be monitored properly. Otherwise, the consequences that we had in subprime that can repeat. So we need to have a monitoring mechanism to control that as well. At the same time, I think our colleague from India mentioned that the DBR, the debt burden ratio, LTV, age, all those are actually there in Bangladesh also. So it's not something that we have to develop, it's already there. The challenge is because of the lack of confidence on the enforceability, actually although the secured portfolio does not really get the same attention or attraction by the banks because of the two things. One is the credit norms, because the deposition history is not that great. On the second time, it's a funding mismatch. Now, the funding mismatch can be covered through refinancing window or bond market, right? So bond market, as I mentioned about, there are multiple ways of a financing company can raise and then offload in the market through asset-backed securitization. And obviously from the equity side, both REIT can play a role. So for the challenges that we see for the banking sector is at this point of time is obviously the mismatch we talked about. So if we can develop the bond market, and to raise the bond market, we need the pension fund, sovereign fund, life insurance. So those needs to be in place so that they can fund it. Secondly, on the administrative perspective, the regulatory framework of, let's say, the Rajuks and others, these processes are absolutely cumbersome. Now, if you do want to get a non-encumbered certificate, then if you go to the sub-registry office, it's going to be a nightmare to ensure with full certainty that these properties are unencumbered. But I know A2I has done a significant work in terms of identifying property, but I don't think it's become public as yet, so we are unable to take the leverage. So basically, the digitization of the end-to-end process will help bring down the litigation resolution in a shorter time, bring more transparency, bringing more confidence on the investors. So that will be a big role to play. Legal perspective, as you know, that our experience of reinforcement has not been that great. But what it happens because of the collateral or because of the value of the collateral, we see a lot of borrowers come forward to settle those claims, and so that's why I'm saying if it is a speculative investor, it is difficult to get this settlement done. But if it's a first-time homeowner, which is the case largely for Bangladesh, can actually have a good repayment track record. There is a cap on the for the banks to lend. It is for mortgage perspective, I think it should be revisited because there's an anomaly between NBFI and the banking sector. Until that happens, probably there is also an opportunity to do a co-financing between NBFI and banks. That is not allowed at this point of time. So if we are allowed to do that, then we can leverage the liquidity of both institutions. So I think it's important to focus on the digitization, legal framework reforms, simplification of the legal from regulatory process, development of bond market, and those restrictions that is there for many of the central bank perspective, those should be lifted. To your question, you have a question. I've probably answered part of it. Just to give an update on the insurance, there has been a good development. Central Bank and IDRA has agreed to, under the guidance of Financial Institution Division of Ministry of Finance, they have agreed to provide go ahead for bank issuance. Hopefully, it will be launched in next 6 to 12 months' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasser. You've been very concise and very pointed. Thank you. May I now request Mr. Salimuddin, Chairman, Bangladesh House Building Finance Corporation. We all know that House Building Finance Corporation is the single most important public sector housing lending institution in Bangladesh. So we'd like to hear from you, Mr. Salimuddin, how you foresee your institution and others to develop in a way that can support the kind of housing financing we are looking forward to, and that's being discussed in this session. So your own thoughts about your organization will be the starting point, and then you can go to the others. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very honorable today's chief guest, Mr. Salman Abdurrahman, advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister for investment and the private sector investment, and the learned moderator, Dr. Ahsan S. Mansoor, and keynote presenter and learned panelist and other discussion. I must congratulate both the keynote presenter for their excellent presentation and focusing mainly on Bangladesh issue. Your question is, I can start. Already one of our panelists said we have only the 100 10 crore taka as a paid-up capital, and some loan has been given from the Bangladesh Bank to the House Building Finance Corporation, and other. This is the sources. And in 2018, I think in 10 September, we got the from Islamic Development Bank to the extent of 94 million euro. And already till today, 90% of this amount has been disbursed. This is all about, and the profit what comes from the housing business that reinvested annually. Then we have a very confined limitation about the sources of fund. That is the in per year, we are just investing, say, not more than 1,000 crores, as you know, and the portfolio is 1,000 crores, and the 700 or 600 crores we are just recovering. That amount is reinvested. This is the all about the limitation of the House Building Finance Corporation. But still within this limitation, we have a 12 types of the product. Then we call it in Bengali Nagar Bandhu, city friend, and a flat loan, flat registration loan, and we have for the non-resident Bangladeshi loan, for the Pavash Bandhu loan. We have a Pollima loan. We have for the farmers loan. We have a house improvement loan, house repairing loan, and we have a zero equity loan, which we introduced for the Jubilee of Mujib Barsha. And we have a housing equipment loan. We have a lastly Sharia product loan that's completely concentrated for the fund received from the ISDB, Islamic Development Bank, that disbursed under the Sharia product. We call it Monjil, and that loan, that investment should be, as per ISDB condition, we have to disburse in the rural and peri-urban area only. And we have in future, we have a plan. If we get the fund from the international donor, international financial corporation, then we have a plan to the affordable financing, low cost housing, and the hire to purchase system, so that one can get the loan within the rental value from the, specifically from the foreign loan. Why it is possible? It is possible as because of the, when we receive the loan or grant or whatever it is, very cheap rate from the ISDB, say, we're receiving the ISDB at 3%. But the House Building Finance Corporation actually has the some capability to disburse it without adding the any spread with the 3% to the some segmented area. You see, that requires the regulatory measures. That's required the oversight body, that's required the specific policies. Otherwise, we cannot open this type of the window to give the cheap rate of the finance for housing, for affordable or low cost housing. That's one of the reasons. And another reason, you see, if you just divide, from my experience, if you divide all the housing market into three tier, high income household who demand for the luxury apartment or the luxury house, and that segment is in Bangladesh around is the 3%, and highest disposable income, who are affordable by the very high quality house or apartment, and they are very much in the FX group. They are utilizing the loan or financing from the bank and BFI, and I should say some diverted fund. They just raised from other persons, but they are diverting in the luxury house, you know, and some illegal money and the so-called black money, and finally the own source. They have the financing in the same. You see, we have a middle income group who has a demand only the semi-luxury apartment, representing only the 15%. They are the main core group who raise the financing for their house from bank and from the NBFI. especially. And there the consist of the formal income group, especially salaried person who are engaged in the, dominating the salaried person who engage in the public sector and the private sector. And one limitation we are just see after analyzing the, if you analyze the regulatory whole process in Bangladesh Bank or the portfolio restriction, why is that? There is a, we understand, we perceive one dilemma that there is a portfolio restriction by the government, by the Bangladesh Bank especially, imposed by regulator, but there is a demand for the housing finance. Why the restriction? As because of the due to the unexpected move to the housing bubble. That's the main concern of the government, I think. So in that category, I will just suggest something as you from the viewpoint of the experience of the Bangladesh House Building Finance Corporation, we need to create the long-term funding option, like from home or abroad for low-cost home, to make those affordable to the vast majority of the middle and low-income people. No alternative.
Mr. Salimuddin, may I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Are you going to raise funds by going to the bond market to augment your resource base, because you are now constrained with resources? And secondly, are you going to say, let's not cater to the high end, which is they can fund from any other sources, focus on the affordable housing segment more and more in urban areas?
Yeah. We are just first. We are just two choices. Is that one is the bond, another is the, if we directly got the finance from the international financing agency, that better for us, as because this is the 100% government-owned company. When the some international financing company offer us, then we will, as a government company, we will just select that one the first. Okay. Then I already told you, if we got the, say we have some financing arrangement with the pipeline, and we are trying to just pursue our oversight body to give us the exact policy, strategy, and regulatory framework to disburse, I am telling you, to disburse the fund with the cheap cost to the affordable housing.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what we wanted to hear from you.
Otherwise, I cannot, house building cannot just afford all the time by taking the board decision to the as a cheap cost to the affordable housing.
Okay, you have answered our questions, and thank you. And I appreciate your willingness to work with the international financial institutions and also with the government to bring about the necessary reforms within your organizations to make you more empowered to serve the middle income group and lower middle income group in future. We take it in that positive aspect. Thank you very much. And may I now request Mr. Tierno Habib Han. He has vast global experience. So we'd like to hear from you 2-3 things. One is how the World Bank Group or IFC in particular can help mortgage refinance in Bangladesh, development of that institutional framework. Can we, how we can, IFC can help also support the Real Estate Investment Trust, REITs, the mortgage insurance scheme, and possible establishment of real estate regulatory authority. We'd like to hear these issues along with your own thoughts in other aspects. Mr. Han.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mansour. Really appreciate it, and very glad to see that we are moving forward with our webinars. This is the 4th one. Thank you very much for all the facilitation, and welcoming really our chief guest, and thank him for his time to participate in this 4th webinar. I'm very happy to be here on this panel having provided the keynote on the last discussions we had a few weeks ago. Now getting into a bit more detail about what we as IFC and World Bank Group in general have been trying to do, right? And that could be leveraged in what we're trying to look at here in Bangladesh. And I just want to take it from where Dr. Salim just left it, right? In terms of access to long-term finance, right? This is key, and it's really the heart of the issue, right? In many of the markets where we work. Access to long-term finance is extremely critical, and this is long-term local currency financing. And usually we have that constraint because most of the financial institutions have access to deposits and very short-term borrowing, and they cannot really on lend long-term, right? Which is a requirement for the mortgage market. To really make housing affordable, you really need to have longer maturities to make those monthly payments lower and smaller, right? Because the longer the maturity, the smaller those installments are. Just like Dr. Salim was saying earlier, trying to equate, right, the rental that individuals are used to pay to the mortgage installments could be actually the greatest achievement, because that's what would make sure that people can pay their mortgages on time and similar to what they would pay anyways as a rent. So long-term funding is key. So for that, the way we have been really helping different other markets is through these mortgage refinancing companies. And we heard from Dr. Chakravarti from India, the NHB, National Housing Bank, which is a mortgage refinancing company, among other things. And it's 100% government owned in that particular case. Now, from IFC and World Bank Group perspective, we have a lot of lessons learned about setting up those MRCs or mortgage refinancing companies as an apex institution, right? That could really help get access to long-term funding. And the way we do that is really by bringing in both private sector and public sector to create this mortgage refinancing company, because not all countries have the same sort of realities as India, obviously. So in many countries where we work, it's extremely important to get the private sector part of this apex institution. And the way we do that is by really mobilizing equity from those financial institutions in the countries. And then government will be a minority shareholder, obviously, to bring in that confidence in the structure and pushing the reforms that are needed to help the housing sector. Because it's not just about addressing the demand side or long-term financing, it's also about addressing all the constraints that we talked about earlier. So the way IFC does that in helping set up those mortgage refinancing companies is by participating at the onset, right, in the feasibility studies and analysis of the market to see how this mortgage refinancing company would be set up. Or is it that we look at an existing institution like BFC to sort of restructure such an institution to play that refinancing role in the industry. So that's something that we can definitely look at, and we've looked at in many other markets. So we would inject equity, right, to get this sort of institution started. We've done this in several countries already, from Latin America to Africa and also in Asia, this side of the world. So we would inject initial capital to help support such an institution. It's not an institution that needs hundreds of millions of dollars, right? It's really a small capital level to get it started. And then the main goal for such an institution is to actually go to the capital markets and issue bonds, right? So IFC would help mobilize the private sector, not only in the equity raise, right, to bring on board all the financial institutions within the country to become shareholders of such an institution, of the MRC, the Apex, and then work with the Apex institution to go to the capital markets to issue long-term bonds, right? And IFC will potentially become an anchor investor and encourage private investors in the capital markets like pension funds, provident funds, and even financial institutions to subscribe to the bond issuance of this mortgage refinancing company, right? So that's how we really intervene. And then we also provide advisory services, right, to help in the setting up process and working with the financial institutions in the country to strengthen the underwriting capacity, right, and also help them, you know, understand sort of what kind of risk management is needed, and perhaps to go down market, right, low income and informal income segment. It's also important to know how to underwrite those segments of the population. So we also work on that, on those aspects on the advisory side. And then just to end maybe on the capital markets front that you also mentioned, you know, yes, we do encourage development of capital markets, looking at different structures like REITs, real estate investment trusts, mortgage-backed securities. We're in discussions in India as we speak right now with Mr. Chakrabarti on securitization. And this is for more mature markets, right, where we can talk about securitization. But at the beginning, we really need to start building the primary market, strengthen it, and then move to the secondary market. But nothing stops us from looking at the feasibility of capital markets development also at this early stage. So if I may just pause there for a second, if you have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Han. We'll be going for open floor discussion now. We're running a little bit behind, and thank you for your very valuable contributions.
Thank you.
We have other guests who participated in other events, and they have joined us in this event as well. We welcome them, and we'd like to request if any of you would be interested to say something. Please raise your hand. Okay, Mr. Nasimul Batin.
Yeah.
MD,
Hello.
Delta Brack Housing. So please go ahead.
Yeah,
And we'll be very short in 2-3 minutes so that we can.
Yeah, just I have a question actually to Mr. Chakrabarti. I'm not sure whether he's here. I cannot see him, but if he's here, my question is actually to know how the refinance mechanism works in India, how the NHB refinance the housing finance companies, and what are the like modalities?
Yeah, I'm Chakravarti, sir. I'm here. Can I answer, sir?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, sir. We since this NBFIs are regulated, sir, by the Reserve Bank of India. Our exposure norms are slightly relaxed compared to any other corporate. So against a pool of loans, they create a charge and giving it to NHB, the book debts. Against that, we extend refinance to them.
Thank you. Any other question?
Like you refinance 100% of the loans, or actually?
Yeah, no. It depends on the rating of the counterparty. We also rate the borrower. If it is AAA, then we give 105% margin. We take margin just like any other credit exposure.
Okay. And may I know the approximately rate of interest for this refinance is?
Yeah, since NHB raises being a quasi-sovereign, as one of the Mr. Bejoy told that we enjoy the quasi-sovereign status, that we can borrow at lower rates. So normally we give AAA bond rates plus a spread, which is hardly 1%. Right now it could be around 6.25%, sir. 6.25 to 6.5.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who would wish to raise his hand or her hand?
Mr. Hassan, you asked one question which I did not answer. The definition of affordable housing, it can be in two ways. In terms of income, it could be 6 lakhs per annum. Alternately, it could be 60 square meters in terms of carpet area. Two ways we can define that.
Okay. That's the Indian definition.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? Mr. Iqbal, are you here? Mr. Iqbal Abdullah Harun?
Yes, sir. Thank
Would
you
like
very
to
much,
say
sir.
something from in Ministry of Environment perspective?
Yes, I'd like to thank for inviting me, Honorable Advisor to the Prime Minister and distinguished guests. Actually, from the side, I was represented in the earlier events, and I have interest on understanding that how we can finance. That was the big question for us. Right now, we don't have these in our, many things are not in our policies, but broadly there are indications that we gradually will move towards that. So today's discussion was very rich, particularly the financing part that I enjoyed thoroughly, and I think that it should be useful for us to formulate the next round of policies that we are going to launch, like BCCSAP and others, which is in the process. So I think that would be a good opportunity for us to know the perspective from the different stakeholders. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to speak very briefly? Like Mr. Mahbub Rahman, I saw you before, but I don't see you now. Or Ihsanul Azim, would you?
Yes. Good afternoon. Sorry, Nasir bhai, you can go first. I'll come on.
No, it's okay. You go ahead. I'll speak later.
Okay. Sure. Yep.
Thank you. Hi, this is Ihsanul Azim. I am work with IFC and look at the financial sector investments in Bangladesh. I mean, it's not a question, just a comment. I think in terms of our role in Bangladesh in the housing sector, my colleague Habib quite nicely articulated how IFC can support. We are working at the client level with banks to try and support with their own long-term financing. I think the key critical aspect is access to long-term finance, as many of the speakers spoke about. For this segment, you really need the mortgages to be 10 to 15 years. And it cannot be treated like the premium segment where actually a lot of prepayments happen. So in that sense, I think bilaterally, of course, we will always support, and then of course other investors can come in, but the importance of a market maker, a mortgage refinance company, I think is critical to access liquidity and also accessing the capital markets. Thank you.
Nasir, would you say something?
Yes. Yeah, there was one particular point I wanted to highlight that could become an impediment, is that there is a difference between the actual price of the transaction, value of the transaction versus the registered value, the moja value that's there. What it does, it creates a problem for financial institutions because it will require a reporting of suspicious activity to the Bangladesh Financial Intelligence Unit going forward. And as the market evolves, it will become more and more relevant. So it will, actually restrict the financial institution, more compliant financial institutions to provide financing unless this alignment takes place. I think the fix is very easy. We have proposed to Chairman National Board of Revenue to bring down the registration cost and reflect the market price on the government assessed moja value. This is quite critical. I would like to request Honorable, Private Sector Advisor to please help us on this so that we can have better transparency and it improves the tax structure also. Thanks.
Thank you. Just one question from media side came. Anybody can answer it. It is whether it's critical important is the foreclosure law and the deed titling. How important are those for Bangladesh? Anybody can answer that, whoever feels comfortable from our panelists. Nasser?
It is very, very important. It's very, very important. And the reason I'm saying that there is a contradiction between two laws. I think there is a executive authority is there given to the tribunals. Tribunals can actually overrule the judiciary, and then it create complications. So I think the transparency needs to be brought in, and the speed of the foreclosure is very, very critical for even for the low cost housing and everything for this development of the sector.
Thank you. Iqbal, have you raised your hand?
Yes, sir. Actually,
Yes,
I just wanted to add one more point that as the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, like a lot of demands are coming to our tables every day. So it is very difficult to address each of them and decide on these things right away. So it's a long process, everybody knows. So what we are trying right now, because we have started discussing that with some of our partners, like to have a green growth strategy. So that would be more encompassing, and that will definitely include this urban housing sector. So that's the addition that I wanted to make.
Thank you. Just on behalf of our World Bank colleagues, I just want to say that there is a green growth initiative being discussed with the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Environment and other relevant stakeholders right now, and it is in the pipeline. We hope we can that project can go ahead and proceed. Nasser, you wanted to say something?
Yes, one of the new developments that has come through that there will be cap of 8-story building, which is going to be counterproductive because you need to go vertical in the urban areas to provide more green. So that is another point I want to highlight.
Yes, it's a controversial issue, which is maybe we should draw attention to our advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister on that. Now, let me, if no other questions, let me, okay. There's one question, one hand has been raised from Oluwatun from World Bank. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mansour, and thanks to everyone. Please permit me to stand on existing protocol. I think just in addition to what my colleagues Ehsan and Habib have also stated, I wanted to add that, when we're talking about the need for capital market development as well, a very critical element would also be the political will to get the long-term financing agents in the market to participate in these instruments when they do come to market. And I'm referring to, the pension funds. I think currently in Bangladesh as well, right, there isn't any regulatory authority that is really focused on the long-term financing institutions in the local market. And what does a regulatory body can also help do in that instance is to then help with guidelines around investment allocations. So you will then begin also to see pension funds, move away from traditional asset classes and also being critical players in financing housing development in Bangladesh. So I think, that's where they would come together with the mortgage refinancing institution and really help to play a very critical role, both in capital markets development and also in the housing finance sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last hand raised is Mr. Shikdar, DMD of DBBL.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. The point that I wanted to share with you is from our experience that as far as the definition of affordable housing is given, the most of the segment of this customer are exist in rural areas, and whatever we experience is like that. Since we have to follow the loan equity ratio is 70-30, that means 30% investment has to be ensured by the customer. So since we are operating across the country through our more than 7,000 touch points, so we have experienced a huge demand of this affordable housing and loans. But many times we can experience that customers are not able to invest 30% first, and then we can ensure them 70% loan. That is a problem for them that we experience, and how can we address this issue?
Thank you. This is an issue, of course, and in most other countries, we know there's this 80-20 or even 90-10 that's there. And also, in addition to that, there's a complicating factor. The valuation also, this is from the bank side, financial institutions perspective. You also insist on a valuation which is extremely conservative, which leads to higher burden on the part of the buyers to upfront cash.
Yes,
because,
sometimes.
So that's also a problem. So the banks have to be a little bit careful about their valuation method with their assessors as well. Thank you very much. I will just take 5 minutes. Our chief guest is here. I'm sure you would like to all hear from him. I'll take 5 minutes just to summarize the key points.
One point, Mr. Hassan M. Chakravarti.
Yes.
You can create a mortgage guarantee vehicle also, which will reduce the equity so that instead of 70-30 that can go to 85 or 90, provided there's a mortgage guarantee vehicle, sir. That's the only point I wanted to suggest.
Thank you. Yes, we have discussed that issue. That issue is not detailed, but have been flagged in our discussion as well. Let me just put a few things in perspective. We all know that Bangladesh has a serious urban planning problem, and the growth in urban population has been spectacular. I mean, more than 3% per annum is the urban population growth in Bangladesh. And that is almost three times the average growth of Bangladesh population. So this is area where we need to pay more attention from the government side. And we have to know also that this population growth in urban areas is coming from various factors like internally displaced persons, like climate refugees from south, river erosion, people who became landless. They are migrating in large number to the urban areas. People seeking jobs and opportunities, of course, they're coming to our major cities. The important thing is that none of those people had land or assets in urban areas. They come and they're newcomers, and they need to be provided with housing down the line. Now, issue is that there's already a serious supply shortfall. And the rental rate, unfortunately, the rental rate paid by, our chief guest has raised his hand. May I? Someone, right, please? You have to unmute.
No, I haven't.
Oh, your hand is shown there, so by mistake. Anyway, so what is the issue is that the unfortunate thing is that the per square feet rental that the people in slums are paying in Dhaka city, these newcomers, is often higher than the rent that we pay in Gulshan or Bonani or Dhanmondi or other posh areas of Bangladesh. So that is the very unfortunate reality. And that needs to change. And only way to change it is through higher supply of affordable housing, making it affordable to the people who can buy them or rent them as well at a cheaper price. Now, we know that various issues have been discussed in this session, and globally there are lots of examples, lots of models which we can learn from and we should learn from. We know that the depth of mortgage financing in Bangladesh is about 3%, which is 1/3 of the depth of mortgage financing in sub-Saharan Africa as well. 1/3, and 1/20th of industrial countries. So that number must change in future to make houses affordable for all. Bangladesh is striving to become an upper middle income country by 2031. And if the country becomes upper middle income, we have to provide housing for the bulk of the population in urban areas. They cannot be living like what they are living now. So that's the challenge. And that challenge is a formidable challenge. It's not an easy challenge. We must give due consideration to urban affordable housing from the highest level of the government. We have to housing should not be seen as a non-essential sector. It is an absolutely essential sector. It is part of our growth dynamics. It is a driver, our engine of growth as sector as well. So we have to take care of the housing sector. We know that in every country, in the industrial countries in particular, when a downturn starts, it starts from housing. It's as important as that. It is the #1 sector in terms of contribution to growth. And ours, we cannot fall, we cannot stay where we are in terms of housing sector development. Solutions will require, as discussed, a development of an ecosystem. It cannot be done by one action or two action here and there, isolated way. It has to be done in a very systematic way to develop a full ecosystem which will support, reinforce each other. And that system will encompass, of course, land is a constraint and the government has to play a role in that area. Affordable mortgage is a problem. Whole financial sector issues needs to be looked at in that area. Housing finance through small loans should be considered and given a priority. Capital market issues have been discussed. And we know that capital market has a significant role to play in terms of mortgage financing, or which is equivalent to also bond financing, asset-backed securities for development of infrastructure. We also know that REITs, that's also related with the capital market. So capital market has a significant role to play. Risk sharing issues through mortgage guarantee scheme, credit risk management mitigation. These are important institutional arrangements which can help reduce risk. Targeted subsidies, of course, should be considered because in most countries, housing for the poor is subsidized. In Bangladesh also, for the rural people, our Honorable Prime Minister has initiated Astrayan Prokolpo, which is fully grant element, and that's a great initiative, but we need to do things for the urban poor, urban middle income, lower middle income as well. And there's a subsidy element or support from government, incentive structure must be put in place to help the builders, the financial institutions, and the buyers so that it becomes affordable to them. Urban planning is also important because not everybody can be accommodated within the core Dhaka city. We have to have the infrastructure, connectivity, in terms of the whole range of transportation system, as well as schools and healthcare system to develop in the peripheries so that people can live there and quickly commute in terms of coming here and there. The examples of India and Egypt are particularly relevant for Bangladesh, which shows many things that I'm not going to, but important aspect is that this is a long process. To develop the housing market and really significantly increasing the housing sector will take time, but we have to do it in a sustained way so that we can reach that destination. Last thing is that institutional framework is very important. We must not forget about the institutions that will need to be constructed or reconstructed or reformed to deliver the necessary impetus to that process. I will stop at that and I will request our Honorable Chief Guest, Mr. Salman F. Rahman, to make his observations, and we look forward to that. Thank you, Salman bhai.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. At the very outset, this is the month of February, and I would like to start by paying my homage and remembering with respect the martyrs of the language movement, which actually, because of their ultimate sacrifice, we were able to establish our mother language. I'd like to also congratulate PRI, the World Bank, IFC for organizing these roundtables. I think it's very timely, and this subject of today's event is very, very, I think, important, as all the panelists have mentioned, that housing is definitely a very important issue. At the same time, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the keynote speaker for a very, very interesting presentation and also all the other panelists for their contributions. I would like to start with, I would like to talk more on the macro level first, and then I'll go and address some of the micro issues which have been raised. On the macro level, I want to actually start first with that what do you define as urban? The impression I got was that you are defining Dhaka city as your main urban center, and all the problems that are related in Dhaka city is what you are trying to address. But I don't think that's the right approach. The Honorable Prime Minister has actually initiated a program where she is wanting that the villages should also become urbanized. And, and that we are also seeing. We are seeing that with the economic development, especially where with the fiber optic connectivity, which we have now got, and over 4,000 digital centers which we have established at the union level, work is now being done. It's in some areas you are getting results, but in some areas it's work in progress, and soon you will see a lot of results in this. Is that, for example, a huge number of qualified young people who would normally have moved to the cities for finding jobs, which you mentioned in your concluding remarks, are actually now remaining at their home in the village and are working as freelancers and are working as, in the IT sector, and they are working, they don't have any requirement actually to come to the city. At the same time, you mentioned about the people from river erosion and the people who are displaced. Yes, some of them come to the cities, but because of this initiative which Honorable Prime Minister has taken for providing houses to the landless, and as you know that she has committed that in Mujib Bashar this year, when we are celebrating the 100th birth anniversary of the founder of the nation, Bangabandhu, she has said that by the end of this year, she wants that nobody will be homeless. So the landless people will get free land and free housing from the government. And this process, you also mentioned the various programs which have been undertaken. And I just wanted to give you some statistics which are quite interesting. Is that this year alone, the government has constructed and delivered 117,329 homes to landless people all over the country. And at the moment, under construction is another 54,200. So by the end of the year, nearly over 170,000 houses would have been delivered. And since the program has started in the last 10 years, a total of over nearly 500,000 houses have been given to the landless people. So that initiative is there. And so what is happening actually, and this is something which you need to also study, that the urbanization is actually taking place now very much at some of the upazilas, where the economic development is really going this thing, and specifically some districts, even in the North Bengal, say Bogra, for example, or Rangpur, for example. These are districts where you will find that there are some upazilas where there has been major urbanization already taking place. In Dhaka also, you will find that if you go to Savar, you go to Ghazipur, these areas, if you come downwards to Keraniganj, Nawabganj, you will find that there is major urbanization taking place. So just concentrating on issues with Dhaka, I think you should look at this. I would just suggest that when you all do your studies, this is something on a macro level, I think should be addressed. The other thing which, coming to Dhaka now, as you know, the government has also over here taken a lot of initiatives for making affordable apartments and houses for the slum dwellers. And already Rajuk has taken a number of initiatives. And I would have thought that as a part of today's discussion, you should have also done some research on these initiatives and to find out that what the total problem is and to what extent these initiatives are actually addressing the problem, to what percentage they are actually addressing the problem. Why I say this is because, you know, there is been a huge, for the government, especially not so much affordable housing, although I understand what you have been focusing on, but also for people who can't afford. What are the issues which the government has already taken? And that's another area which we need to address. You have said that, you know, the debt equity ratio, mortgage guarantees, these I understand will definitely help to alleviate the issues. But programs which have already been taken should also be analyzed and to find out how successful they have been. What you have only gone and addressed is the House Building Finance Corporation, what they have done. But House Building Finance Corporation actually caters to a very, very, I would say, a very narrow percentage of society. And if I'm not mistaken, the maximum they do is that for government officers, is their maximum number of customers are government officials or salaried persons. So this is something which I thought on a macro level, I'd just like to flag that, you know, some research and some work should be done on that. The other thing which is now some of the issues which have been raised, I agree 100% that we need to actually, you know, the India model was very interesting that we have only the House Building Finance Corporation as one institute. We have another institute, which is the National Housing, I think it's under the Ministry of Works. They do some works. But what I think is that we need to follow the Indian model, have more institutions in the private sector. And those should be properly regulated, licensing should be given, and they should be sort of geared for doing housing. That recommendation is a very good recommendation. And I think the government should actually seriously look at that. The other issue over there is that you also mentioned satellite cities. And as you know, that a number of satellite cities have been planned in and around Dhaka, but it takes time for these satellite cities actually to really develop. For example, if you will remember, Mirpur was also initially designed as a satellite city. And it took quite some time for Mirpur to actually get integrated as part of Dhaka. The same happened with Uttara. Uttara was also one of the satellite cities which was designed. And it took quite some time for Uttara to also get fully developed. Now we have done the big one which is happening in, I forget the name.
Purvachal.
Purvachal. Purvachal is a big one, and then the government is also taking another very big satellite. Rajuk is doing another one very big satellite city near in between Dhaka and the Savar area. So these initiatives are taking place. On the other hand, which we have found that some banks have been giving home loans. Of course, giving home loans in the urban area is yes, but also in the villages, in the rural areas, some banks have been quite successful in giving home loans. And especially banks have now started actually financing if somebody owns a piece of land. Normally, the banks would be very reluctant to sort of lend against these kind of small pieces of land in the villages, you know, something like which you have inherited and is your family land, so to speak. And now, but banks have become, are lending against these, and that's also been quite successful. Although the numbers are small, but I'm told a number of banks especially the Islamic Bank, Islamic Bank of Bangladesh, BRAC. BRAC Bank is also quite active in these areas. Recently, I am told Dutch Bangla Bank has also launched these home mortgage schemes. But of course, these are just these are initiatives which are taking place. But on a large scale, I agree that we need to we have to really look at this, and this should be done in a much more in a larger scale. And many of the suggestions which have been raised are very, very good. I think two things which have been raised, I'd like to address. One is registration costs. I agree that we need to look at that and see how this can be rationalized. In certain areas, it has been rationalized, but I think more needs to be done, at least for this. You know, you could put a value. So if it is for affordable housing, a certain value of housing can, the registration cost, there can be, what I'm saying, different slabs of registration costs, depending on the value, which is there already, but I think that needs to be revisited so that it is more, the affordable housing is incentivized. The other area which you have mentioned is the capital market, pension funds. These are very, very valid, this thing, and also the bond market. And already BSIC is doing a lot of work on to developing the bond market. IFC is doing a lot of work on this. One of the big constraints which we have identified is that in the banking company law, the exposure to the capital market is defined, the capital market exposure in the definition, bonds are also included with equity. And that needs to be taken care of. I understand that the BSIC and Bangladesh Bank and the Ministry of Finance are working on amending the law so that long-term debt instruments are not included in the capital market exposure. I think once that amendment takes place, then there will be that will also help in easing the present financial constraints. Another issue which has been raised, which I've always been raising, and it's a very, very important issue, and that is mismatch. The banking sector in Bangladesh, the biggest problem with us is that we have short-term deposits and we are funding long-term lending with the short-term deposits, and there's a huge mismatch. It's not only in the housing sector, it's, that is one of the structural defects of the entire banking system. And of course, as far as today, you all have identified a few areas of a few proposals which would help to ease this mismatch. If we could have mortgage guarantee schemes and we could have refinancing and things like that, if we could bring in that kind of a system, then at least as far as the housing sector is concerned, to a large extent, this this mismatch could be addressed. And so I think more or less, this is what basically, which I would like to conclude as saying with this is that, another issue which you mentioned was the 8 stories, which you wanted to, that the limit which has recently been made by 8 stories. There, what is, I think, we are looking at it, but I'm, what the committee, the DAB, the Dhaka Area Plan Committee, headed by the Honorable LGRD Minister. I was having a word with him the other day in Parliament, and he mentioned, and he said that we have not really limited it or in everywhere. What we have done is where the road is very narrow, that's where that limit actually comes in. So the idea was that Dhanmandi and Gulshan has been limited, for example, and they said, no, there the limit has not come in. So then we said, even in Badda, so what I think they are agreeing to do, they are revising it, is that rather than giving a blanket limit to an area. We have said that in every area you limit it to the, it must be in relation to the width of the road, because that also is very, very important, because you can see what has happened in Dhanmandi and in Gulshan. Gulshan and Dhanmandi was never actually designed for high rise. So you don't have enough water, the sewerage problem, there's huge problems over there. Now in Gulshan, Dhanmandi, you have another big problem. Not only do you have high rises, but in the main artery roads, you are making it commercial. So the moment you bring in commercial this thing, then there are issues of parking, and there is issue not only of parking, there's also a serious issue of traffic. So I think this is something which one will need to balance. But like I said, that it's not, it's something which is being looked at. So I think again, so with these, I'll conclude with these words. Again, I would like to thank PRI, World Bank, IFC for organizing this event, and to thank you for inviting me to be the chief guest. Thank you very much. Joy Bangla, Joy Bongo Bondhu.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Salman Rahman, for giving your valuable time to us. We have our concluding remarks. I hope you will just wait to hear it also. Mr. Alan Forlemu, Regional Industry Director, he will be speaking from Washington at this late hour. So we also thank him for being patient and bear with us at this late night. So Mr. Alan Forlemu, please make your concluding observations based on what has been discussed so far.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all, and especially to our honorable chief guest, distinguished guests, panelists, and all participants. I would like to convey my sincere appreciation to Mr. Salman Fazlur Rahman, MP, Honorable Advisor to the Prime Minister on Private Industry and Investment, for his participation today and his valuable insights. Your presence here today greatly emphasizes the government of Bangladesh's intent of ensuring safe, affordable, and climate-friendly housing for all, and especially for the low and lower middle income families living in the urban areas of Bangladesh. Thank you, Dr. Hassan Mansour, for summing up today's discussion so well and helping us in identifying the way forward. Many thanks to Mr. Chakravarti, NHB General Manager, for sharing India's experience in developing a successful, affordable housing market. I would also like to thank our panelists, distinguished presenters, and other esteemed guests today from the government of Bangladesh, Bangladesh Securities and Exchange Commission and Bangladesh Bank, Bangladesh House Building Finance Corporation, Rajuk, financial institutions and housing developers and builders. Your participation here today marks your commitment and a true partnership towards the development of the affordable housing sector in the country. There is global evidence that developing the housing sector has a direct and a multiplier effect on the economy of any country. Housing is comprised not only of housing units, but also of complex interconnected sectors, including construction material, related services that involve brokers, finance and insurance providers, utilities, labor, consumer spending on house, appliances, etc., all contributing to the GDP of the country and attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. More recently, with the multiple crises in the wake of COVID-19, we have seen housing construction and housing finance become a cornerstone of economic recovery strategies from the pandemic for many emerging economies. Cognizant of Article 15 of the Bangladesh Constitution, ensuring shelter for every citizen, and especially the vision for the housing sector under the recent 8th five-year plan of the government of Bangladesh, we feel it is time to collectively identify solutions to support the government in achieving its goals. And given the impact of climate change, where we expect forced migration of almost 20 million people in Bangladesh, we need to promote not just affordable, but also green, that is climate-friendly housing. We also need to work together to overcome the challenges in this sector that were discussed today. In Bangladesh, there are multi-pronged, interrelated challenges that are limiting the development of the housing sector. However, we have seen similar challenges in other countries as well, but with the right focus and commitment of public and private sector stakeholders, driven by a strong will of the government, many emerging economies have been able to steer the growth of the affordable housing sector and provide shelter needs to people who really need it. IFC has witnessed successful experiences in the affordable housing sector in Latin America, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Asia. For example, IFC's experience in India, driven by the government of India's vision of housing for all by 2022 and a definition of affordable housing, provide the opportunities for growth of housing finance companies to successfully provide access to finance to the low and informal income segment of the population. IFC has invested more than 800 million in housing finance companies in India. We just heard from the general manager of India's premier mortgage refinance institution, NHB, at the cornerstone of the housing market development in India. IFC and the World Bank have supported the establishment of many similar institutions in several other markets. We will be very open to discussing similar opportunities in Bangladesh. On the capital markets front, under the Joint Capital Markets Program, the World Bank is providing advisory to the Bangladesh Securities and Exchange Commission to develop the capital markets, specifically the bond market, to ensure long-term local currency funding for infrastructure development financing at affordable and predictable cost. IFC is also providing support to BSEC, that is the Securities and Exchange Commission, to develop the National Sustainable Bond Guidelines covering green, social, and sustainable bonds. A potential source of long-term funds which can be channeled to develop the housing finance sector could be the pension and insurance funds in the country. According to IFC's assessment, total funding provident fund assets in Bangladesh are estimated to be around 6 billion. The World Bank Joint Capital Markets Program team has already offered advisory to the finance division for potential regulatory reforms in the provident fund system to improve governance and supervision and to help harness the source of funding to develop the priority sectors of the economy. We are looking forward to hearing back from the finance division. IFC has considerable expertise in the housing sector and has a global aggregated exposure of $3.9 billion over 82 committed projects in the housing sector as of June 2021, and $1.3 billion committed in 30 projects in South Asia alone. I think we can all agree the urban affordable housing market is largely untapped and is full of business opportunities. With strong direction from the government and effective coordination with the public and the private sector, the World Bank Group offers investment and advisory support across the housing sector value chain. Once again, thank you for being part of this important journey and for your valuable time and commitment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Foreman, for waiting so long to hear us all. It has been very late night in Washington, D.C. And we really appreciate the supporting hand that you extended to the government of Bangladesh and to the housing sector in general, private sector and others. And I'm sure that with support from our chief guest and other guests who have been here in the past, we can build a coalition. We can build a coalition that will take us much further than where we are. And we have to go much further than where we are, because what we have now is not something that we can be proud of. And we have a lot of ambitious objectives. Government has a lot of ambitious objectives, and government would like to achieve those. And commitment from World Bank Group to support that in those initiatives and bring about a real change in the lifestyle, quality of life of the people will be most welcome. And thank you very much. And let me once again thank our chief guest for his long presence, and all the participants for being here with us for so long. And goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.